Thank you, Wofi, for that. We can proceed. Good morning, good afternoon, and also good evening. Wherever you are most welcome to this session, which is to do with TADAT linkages. We have a guest speaker. I'm going to request him to introduce himself. Then we can proceed from there. Simon, you are most welcome. Kindly introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, viewers. My name is Chiyinji Simon Peter. I manage intelligence and data analytics at Uganda Revenue Authority. Prior to this role, I led the team that implemented the technical team that implemented Uganda Revenue Authority's data warehouse and business intelligence solution. I also participated in the developing of the machine learning models that show the linkages within the TADAT dimension. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. We take this opportunity also to welcome Damakrin. Damakrin, we are introducing ourselves. Kindly introduce yourself. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much, Ronald. It's a great pleasure to be a part of this forum. My name is Damakrin Masira Nyandikisi. I work for Kenya Revenue Authority under the department, KESRA, as the manager in charge of research, and I'm a TADAT assessor. I have been involved in TADAT linkages from the onset, so it is very exciting to be in this forum to discuss what we have been working on for the few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Damakrin. I also need to introduce myself. I'm called Ronald Nyenje Makumbi. I am working with Uganda Revenue Authority as a manager in charge of policy analysis and statistics. I have worked with the TADAT framework for a very long time. I am a TADAT assessor. This afternoon, as I had informed you earlier, we are looking at TADAT linkages. TADAT linkages is something that was developed by the TADAT Secretariat, and it's about tax administration. It's about linking all the functional areas of tax administration. Any organization works as a system, and revenue agencies also work as systems. So the TADAT linkage basically tries to address the system thinking of the revenue agencies. Without wasting time, let me go straight to the questions, and I want Simon to help us on this one, because you've introduced yourself as a person who has been behind one of the experts working on these linkages using the artificial intelligence approach, which I believe helped us to really come up with a good framework. What are TADAT linkages? Simon, if you can help us respond to this.
All right, thank you so much. So TADAT linkages, I know that a number might even already know TADAT. It has a number of dimensions. It's a diagnostic tool used to assess the effectiveness of effectiveness and efficiency of countries or even subnationals' revenue administration. So it has a number of dimensions, and that's now where the linkages come in. The linkages, basically, the concept shows the correlation or the relationship between these different dimensions. And it was validated by research, it was validated by domain expertise, but also there was a machine learning model that was developed. The whole idea is that the linkages, one, are crucial because they highlight the different aspects of tax administration's system and how they interact with with one another. I'll give an example. If, for example, you have an effective taxpayer register, it will help you improve your tax compliance, like we'll discuss as we go along, and which will ultimately maybe help you improve your revenue collection. And on the other hand, if you have weak governance practices, they may lead to issues of maybe corruption and then hindering effective tax administration. So it's basically trying to look at the dimensions, which causes the other, the cause effects really, and to guide really. If you touch one area, then you know that you impact a number of other areas. And that's really the linkages.
Wow. In other words, you've given a very good example. When you have a defect taxpayer register, it means that all these other functional areas are all going to be affected. You may not be able to provide excellent taxpayer services. You may not be able to identify taxpayers to audit. You may not be able to identify the right people who are supposed to be paying what. That's what you're saying. That's very interesting. Yes, Damakrin, why are TADAT linkages important to tax administration? Simon has given us a picture, but why do you think these linkages are very important to tax administration, given this kind of environment that we are in right now?
Thank you very much, Ronald, and thank you, Simon, for kicking us off. I'd like to start by saying, no doubt, TADAT linkages are definitely important to tax administrations, and I will give two examples. So one reason why this is very important for tax administrations is for planning purposes. I would want to give a good example of performance outcome area 3, supporting voluntary compliance. Most tax administrations spend so much resources in reaching out to taxpayers and ensuring that they have put in place a number of initiatives to enhance voluntary compliance. But we do this without incorporating or thinking through other areas that have an impact on supporting voluntary compliance. So I could spend quite a number of dollars in setting up programs to support voluntary compliance. But when I look at my register, it is not accurate, it is not reliable. So one, if I miss that link and that correlation, who then am I reaching out to? When I'm looking at supporting voluntary compliance, does that mean that then the messages I'm sending out to taxpayers are general? They then become general and non-effective. So TADAT linkages is very important because it helps us, one, think through the whole process. Take time to think through the whole process. Whatever reforms you want to implement, think through all the correlations and ensure that whoever is critical in that process is in place. That way, you are able to deliver more to enhance compliance with less. So that is one. Secondly, breaking the silos. And I think anyone from tax administrations will confirm that this is one area that is slowly but surely hindering the effectiveness of tax administrations. So TADAT linkages to me is the key in breaking silos, because then if I am looking at dispute resolution, if I want to enhance dispute resolution, I will not just start by looking at dispute resolution, at the objections that are raised. I will go back to look at POS 6, accurate reporting, tax audits. How are they done? Are they accurate enough? Because if they are accurate, if they're conducted and the quality is checked, then the objections, when we come to the objections, there will be a smaller number, or the number that will be at objections will be manageable. So if I fail to look at the tax audits and the audits that are being conducted, we're not looking at the quality and the impact it has on dispute resolution, then I will be forever dealing with objections that I cannot resolve, yet the underlying issue is the audits. And one last example that I want to give before I hand it over back to you, Ronald, is risk management, compliance risk management, and the impact it has on revenue collection. How often do we integrate compliance risk management in everything that we do? So TADAT linkages to tax administrations is critical. Having the first step of understanding the performance outcome areas is definitely critical. Having the assessment done is definitely critical. But the last loop, I call it sealing the loop, is having an understanding of these linkages and mapping, having a direct mapping in tax administrations to be able to see who has a direct and indirect impact on the process that I am about to roll out. That way, again, we are able to enhance compliance, achieve high collections in revenue with less, and will be very strategic in how we roll out our reforms. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ronald.
Wow, thank you so much, Damakrin. There are things that are coming out from your submission. One, with the linkages, you are able to identify the root cause of the problem. In other words, when you're trying to solve a problem, linkages help you, are handy when it comes to identifying the root cause of the problem. That is very critical. Number two, the linkages again resolve the problem of silos. In other words, you work as a team. You are able to work with all these other functional areas. That is also critical. That is something which is coming through. Then number three, the issue of coordinated reforms. That's also very important. You are able to coordinate your tax administration reforms if you use TADAT linkages. It's something which is also critical. So most agencies are struggling when it comes to reforms. And with TADAT linkages, they can help us now to resolve that problem. Again, lastly, in your submission, I noted that they can help us to properly use the limited resources that we have. So once we use the linkages, we can be able to deploy our resources properly. Thank you so much for that submission, Damakrin. Simon, let me get back to you. With your knowledge of artificial intelligence, and you've worked with these linkages, you've used the artificial intelligence to see how the linkages work. Can you explain, or could you provide an overview to the audience of how performance outcome area 1 interacts or affects other performance outcome areas?
Thank you so much, Ronald. Performance outcome area 1, which is really around registration and cleanliness of the taxpayer register, assesses the tax administration's effectiveness in identifying and registering taxpayers, ensuring they will have accurate taxpayer data. Accurate and complete. It's one thing having, accurate data, but it needs to be a complete registration. So taxpayers are actually registered for all the tax types that they are supposed to. So that's POA1. And it affects, for example, POA2 in ways that if your quality of the taxpayer registration database is wanting, then it will affect, one, how you prioritize, say, the high-risk taxpayers when you're going to develop your compliance improvement plan, identification of the risks themselves, because then you don't know if I'm a VAT registered taxpayer, so you get risks that are related to me, to the tax types that I'm registered to. So it really affects a bit, a lot in the effectiveness of the compliance risk management, which is an area within POA2. But again, it affects, it directly impacts the compliance processes. Look at it, you have these taxpayers, but if they are not completely registered, or even for some actually, areas where you don't know who is on the VAT register, then you don't know how you will enforce the timely filing. You don't know how you will enforce the accuracy, the accuracy of the declarations, because then you do not have this master sheet, if I may call it, of the people who are supposed to declare or who are supposed to file for which tax. But again, speaking about things like service POA 3, where you're trying to see how you grow voluntary compliance through taxpayer education and all that, if you do not have a clean register, then, for example, you will call the wrong people, you send emails to people who, they'll bounce. It's all because of the cleanliness of your register. So you won't even sometimes call the right audience to particular sessions, and all this affects the voluntary compliance. So you realize that it's really affecting a number of areas just because of the cleanliness of your register. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much. Basically, to see excellent results in a revenue agency or in tax administration, the taxpayer register, the integrity of the taxpayer register is something which is so critical. That's what you're saying. Thank you. But again, let me give you this question. To what extent has or have these linkages or the knowledge been integrated among the tax administration processes? And maybe you can also explain to the audience some of the achievements so far in addressing some of the gaps in our revenue agencies.
Okay, thank you so much. And maybe also speaking about a little detail on the linkages. We have these direct linkages, like I've been mentioning, but there are also these indirect linkages. When we're doing the machine learning model, we saw that direct, relationships, but then there are also hidden relationships that once you touch one area, it affects so many others. Hidden non-directly, but it would affect, indirectly. But to your question, the extent really, I see that a number of revenue agencies are now leveraging TADAT within their training curriculum really. So I see that a number have started with their staff being trained within TADAT, and so it's really integrated in the training process. But again, even during the alignment of the different modules, different courses, for example, you would want to touch maybe an area of registration, because when you touch that, you touch many other areas. So even the alignment of the trainings, normal trainings relating to awareness on tax campaigns and all that, kind of link following the TADAT. And I see that is really an area that is taking root in a number of revenue agencies. Like Damakrin said, the strategic planning and reforms. We see a number of reforms now being anchored on the TADAT framework. And for me, that's really a plus, because then, if I touch A, then I know that I'll affect B, C, and D. There is one nice one of process improvements. As I've seen, as the number of revenue agencies are trying to tackle improving processes, making it easy for the taxpayers, you'll find them integrating, say, with a number of agencies to maybe validate particular data sets. So you realize they are touching POA1, because then, for example, you're linking with, say, a master source of, say, registration data for companies. And in a way, because you're trying to, you're doing a process improvement, but indirectly, you're improving your registration process, your registration data, since you're improving the process, but you're also making it easy for the taxpayer. So I see that in a number of process improvements. I even see people brainstorming around, if I'm going to improve this, how will I affect A, B, C, D within the TADAT performance outcome areas. Ronald and the viewers, I've also noticed the linkages are introducing a number of new KPIs within revenue agencies. So improving the performance, monitoring, and evaluation. You will see KPIs like value taxpayers. It's not enough to register taxpayers, but when they come, are they giving you some revenue? Are you enforcing on their declarations? So in a way, that's just that one KPI prompts the registration person to be sure when I'm bringing in taxpayers, let me register them completely for purposes of turning them into value taxpayers. And I also want to mention on the area of public accountability, the accountability, which is POA 89, and emphasizing the importance of TADAT linkages in tax administration is improving public accountability, because then I know as I'm being measured on this particular process of accounting for revenue, I need to be transparent, transparent communication. You realize that you now have seed commissioner generals, you have, having a public press, meeting, just walking through the public on how much has been collected, how we are performing, that sort of transparent communication. And it's really then interconnected with, once they know you're transparent, then it builds trust within the other stakeholders and the taxpayers. So for me, it's all, you see that getting you in a number of things therein. And that's really how I see it embedded in a number of processes and the impacts that it's creating. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. That is very rich, Simon. Two things that are coming through. One, the linkages are helping us to improve the integration of tax administration agencies. That is something which is very critical. Number two, when you solve a problem in one area, you need also to see how other areas are impacted. That is also very critical, because you can solve a problem in one area. If you don't understand how it impacts in other areas, then you may not be able to understand how the entire system is being affected. But with the linkages, what you're saying is that once you solve a problem in one area, then you are able to understand how other areas are also impacted. That is what is really coming through. Thank you so much for that one. Integration, very critical, because we need revenue agencies that are well integrated. Solving problems across the entire system, that is another thing which is also coming through. Thank you so much. Demakrin, you talked about silos. One of the most common gaps identified through TADAT assessments for most revenue agencies is that some revenue administrations are working in silos, yet they directly impact each other. Just help us understand, how can linkages be applied to address this gap?
Thank you very much, Ronald. Indeed, and thank you, Simon. Brilliant statements. Indeed, silos is one of the major challenges tax administrations are facing. And I alluded to this earlier when I was just giving a brief introduction of TADAT linkages. Now, tax administrations, the first thing that tax administrations need to do before they get to strategic planning or corporate planning, because this is where reforms and strategies of what we intend to implement over a certain period, this is where we start from, at the corporate planning level. At that level, the key, and this needs to start from top management in any tax administration, an understanding of this mapping who contributes to my pillar. Let me call them pillars. Who has a direct impact to my pillar and who has an indirect impact to what I am doing. And I remember we were challenging some tax administrations to try and do the mapping. So when you are looking at POA1, and let me break it down further, and instead of referring to them as performance outcome areas, let me use processes. So if you are looking at the taxpayer register and you want to enhance the accuracy of your taxpayer register, and you're also looking at on-time filing and on-time payment. So you want to draw up initiatives. In this financial year, these are the initiatives I need to do to enhance on-time filing. When you are developing these strategies, you first need to focus on the register. Because then when you have your register, if it is accurate and reliable, when you are developing a strategy on on-time filing or on-time payment or performance outcome area 5, managing your stock arrears, if you have it right in your register, if you are able to tell that under value added tax, VAT, I have 3,000 taxpayers who are registered for VAT. Therefore, when it comes to on-time filing, I expect 3,000 VAT returns by the end of a particular month on this date. But if you do not have that number, if you do not have that figure, then when it comes to on-time filing, you would not be able to accurately determine who should I expect these assessments from. And when you're looking at payments in terms of revenue, you were not able to forecast and say, I expect X amount of revenue by Q1 or by end of the month or even at the end of the financial year. So this needs to start at that level, at the corporate level where you're looking at your strategic planning. So it is very important. In order to break the silos, there is an exercise that tax administrations need to do from top management. One, have an understanding of the correlations between these processes. I'm referring to them as processes, but they're performance outcome areas. So have an understanding. First of all, have an understanding of the performance outcome areas. Yes. Then later on, do an exercise, and maybe it could be a design thinking process that helps you map out who has a direct and indirect impact on your process. After doing that, after achieving that, then you now go down to developing your strategies, developing your reform initiatives through the financial year. So I think that is the exercise that needs to be done first before, at the corporate level, before cascading it downwards. Because if you fail to do that from the top level, then when it comes down, cascading downwards becomes a problem. So we have an issue in domestic taxes department. You'll only be looking at risk management, compliance risk management from a domestic taxes perspective, but you were not looking at the broader picture. So that is very, very critical from the corporate level. That is where it needs to start. That is where this discussion needs to start from. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Demakrine. You've put it right. You start with strategic planning. Try to understand the relationship between these functional areas or the processes or the performance outcome areas. Then after that, develop your strategy. In other words, you're saying you cannot develop an effective strategy if you don't understand how these functional areas, how these processes interlink or link with each other. That's what is coming through. But the most important thing, strategic planning, understand how the linkages work together, and then you get into the process of developing your strategic your strategy as an organization. That is something which is very critical. It's a journey, it's a process, well stabilized, and those are the steps that you must follow if you are to get value out of the TADAT framework. Thank you so much for
And
that.
maybe, Ronald, before we move forward, if I could just add one statement that I forgot to add in.
Yes.
Maybe what we need to ask ourselves is, as tax administrations, are we on the right track when we have departments? Is it enough to have departments? Because the fact that we have departments also creates silos. Is it a discussion that we need to have? Do we need to go back and relook the model of the structure of tax administrations? Do we need to focus more on departments? Or do we need to now move and break the departments and have processes so that when you're looking at compliance, you have compliance risk management, and then you have all those who feed in through enhancing compliance. So I don't know, maybe this is a tough discussion that we need to think about moving forward as well.
That's a tough one. It's a tough one, but something which is very interesting. I think we may need another session just to discuss that. How can we break the departments and just focus on processes from end to end? I think that's something that can really bring value to revenue agencies. Thank you so much for bringing out that element. Simon, just explain, with your experience in artificial intelligence, and you've really looked at the linkages using artificial intelligence, how does the integrity of the taxpayer register or database affect voluntary compliance?
Thank you so much. And I actually used to think the integrity of the taxpayer register is just about address, name, contact details. But you see, when we introduce the element of the completeness, reliability, it gets broader, because then you're picking other transactional details therein to beef up this 360 degree of the, how you see the taxpayer. And it's not just a register as a list, but then this all supporting information that's meant to help you grow the tax, help enforce on appreciate and know who this particular taxpayer is. And rather than the viewers will believe with me that after creating this 360 degree view, it should really help you know the taxpayer in detail. Thus, you can customize services to particular taxpayers. You will be able to see how do you segment them for purposes of tax education. Which information is relevant to which sector, for example, to which group of taxpayers. And once you give them the relevant information, we do believe that it should then help them comply, because then they know their obligations. So in a way, it stemmed from POA1, the integrity and completeness of the taxpayer register, which you keep building as transactions come through. You develop concepts like an ecosystem, a 360 degree view, but it's all anchored on the taxpayer register. Once you know this, they are helping you see all these, and then, all these services you're giving your clients, and ultimately, you indirectly or directly be affecting performance outcome area 3. You're impacting the voluntary compliance, because then you know who to remind, who to remind for particular, when your due date is about to reach, you can even proactively call the taxpayers. It's one of the things that I see a number of agencies really trying out. You can quickly send out messages, because then you know whom you're sending, who your clients, literally. So in a way, your information is really helping you in driving the voluntary compliance. But again, even as you maintain your register, remember, you know who is supposed to file when. So even as you're following up on the compliance, on time filing, it's something that is anchored on the register. So indeed, it's the foundation, and Of course, we don't have to keep at the foundation alone, keep growing it. And one other area that we might get interested in is it's not just about the master register. Try to build it into now more of an ecosystem. See who is this client dealing with, so it guides you on the compliance initiatives you will apply to such clients. Build it in such a way that it's giving you a 360-degree appreciate your to help you know your clients, and then render the services that will help them easily comply with their tax obligations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon, for that. In other words, the key issue is the ultimate goal of any tax administration is to promote voluntary compliance. And to do that, we must have a register with high integrity. That's what you're saying. That is what is coming through. In other words, we cannot promote voluntary compliance if our register is not in a good state. Thank you so much. But related to that again, to the integrity of the register, how can tax disputes be reduced by having a good taxpayer register? How are the two related?
Thank you so much. And tax disputes really arise from misunderstanding between the taxpayers and the tax administration. I do believe that a highly integral taxpayer register helps you have the information, like have kept updated and all that. But so when tax authorities have reliable data on their taxpayers, it reduces the likelihood of disputes arising from discrepancies in taxpayer records, because then you're all reading from the same hymn, from the same book. So it becomes very easy for you to know that, remember, you've known your client. So in the, and when I say knowing your clients, just know the master register, it's a comprehensive appreciation of your taxpayers. Remember, you're keeping updating. So it should help that even when you reach a particular dispute, you have enough detail that could help actually in that process. But again, with a comprehensive taxpayer register, tax administrations can better track, of course, the taxpayer activities, income sources, transactions, and this enables tax authorities to identify potential non-compliant taxpayers. So and once you do that, you remember in tax administration, we want to do a lot of preventive, and because you have this whole information about the taxpayer, it should reduce the occurrence of disputes arising from inaccurate and incomplete tax declarations, because then you have this whole detail around your taxpayer. Viewers, you will also believe with me that by using the taxpayer register to profile, your taxpayers, of course, based on risk factors, based on a number of, maybe you've sectorized. So taxpayer administrations, tax administrations can focus their compliance efforts on high-risky taxpayers or high-risk sectors, and then you'll have targeted compliance measures which help address potential issues early before, so you can reduce the likelihood. Like I said, we try to do the preventive arising of disputes within the tax administration. But again, disputes that also escalate to the formal legal proceedings can be time-consuming, and expensive, of course, both for taxpayers and the tax administration. So if you had a register that is reliable, the likelihood of disputes reaching that stage is you can try to minimize that, and thereby reducing the costs and resource expenditure. Maybe one key takeaway from this, rather than the viewers, is The register is not just about the master data of the taxpayer. It's about all these particular supporting transactions that help you appreciate him end to end. And that will help you, because then you'll be arguing with facts with the taxpayer. So it should help us really prevent disputes, one, from happening, but even in the event that they happen, the information is kind of clear and in a logical flow that would help reduce the turnaround time of dispute resolution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon, for that submission. Viewers, when it comes to tax disputes, that's one of the most difficult functions in revenue agencies. You wouldn't love to take that direction. If you can avoid it, you need to avoid it. So what Simon is saying is that once you have a proper, well-managed, a clean taxpayer register, then you can be able to also bring down tax disputes in revenue agencies. It's something that we need to look at. And the TADAT linkages bring out this relationship between the two. And that's why we need to bring them on board in revenue agencies and also in our training, so that our staff are able to appreciate the relationship between tax disputes and also taxpayer registration, a clean taxpayer register. Thank you so much for that, Simon. Damakrin, let me get back to you. Now, under POA 9, tax administrations should be accountable and transparent to the government and also to the taxpayers. How does this attribute support voluntary compliance and maybe also enhance revenue mobilization? Just help us understand this element.
Thank you, Ronald. I want to start by a challenge that I was given recently, that when we are collecting revenue, we need to look at the bigger picture. It's not just about collecting revenue, meeting targets, and enhancing revenue every other time. We need to look at the bigger picture. When you enhance revenue, then you're increasing domestic resource mobilization, which then goes to improve, one, our health facilities. It goes to improve our education facilities. And then that child who is out there looking for education can get quality services. When you're sick and you go to the health service, everything that is needed by you is in place. So I wanted to start from there. Then I will bring in the value of this critical, I want to refer to it as critical correlation, linkage, POA 9, and the impact it has on supporting voluntary compliance. When tax administrations, and this is a gap, I like to be very candid, this is a gap that we are experiencing in developing countries. Now, for most developed countries, you will see some of the tax rates are quite high, but the taxpayers pay because they're able to see the value. So what happens when we are not transparent enough? And this is on how the revenue is utilized. It goes beyond the tax administration. If we are not transparent about, one, utilization of this revenue, how it is collected, what reforms, what are our failures or gaps, if we are not transparent, what it does is that it discourages the taxpayer from being compliant. So in developing countries, even for the strategies that we are implementing, you will realize that we are constantly implementing tough reform initiatives because the compliance levels are very low. And they're very low because we are not able to see, taxpayers are not able to see the value of paying taxes. So you are constantly putting strategies to chase taxpayers, literally, to pay taxes. We are not having a scenario where taxpayers are coming to say, I would want to pay my taxes, show me how. So that is one greatest impact, negative impact that transparency has towards supporting voluntary compliance. If you fail to be transparent as a tax administration, and this, as I said, goes beyond tax administration, even as a government, where you fail to be transparent, then the taxpayers are going to shy away from being compliant. So you will have very low levels of compliance. But when you are transparent as a government, as a tax administration, especially on collection and utilization of that revenue, what it then does is that the taxpayer is able to see practically what this revenue is doing for them. So if I pay my taxes and I go to a healthcare service and I receive the top healthcare service, I'll be able to see that when I pay these taxes, then this is the value I get from it. I will quickly go and pay my taxes. I will not need to wait for a compliance officer to come and tell me I have not paid my taxes. That is that key correlation. It is very, very critical. But there are scenarios where we as governments or tax administrations, yes, we are collecting, we want to be transparent, but we are not saying what this revenue is doing. So at times it needs for tax administrations to go a notch further, and the correlation then is not just about the performance outcome areas, but even with key institutions. So probably with a Ministry of Finance or Treasury, to then say, to develop materials that show the taxpayer, when you pay your taxes, this is what it does. So when we are doing initiatives on POA 3 to supporting voluntary compliance, we need to go a step further and partner with other institutions to show the taxpayers, when you pay your taxes, this is what happens. This is where the revenue is channeled to. Once you do that, then you're able to create that awareness of where the revenue is going, because at times it's just not creating the awareness. You are transparent, but you have not created that awareness, so the taxpayer does not know. So the correlation also on transparency and supporting voluntary compliance needs to go beyond telling the taxpayer, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, but after you collect, this is what happens. We need to then think out of the box and go an extra mile to tell the taxpayer, this is where the revenue goes. So I think we just need to be strategic and adopt TADAT linkages and correlations and work with other government agencies to achieve the bigger objective of ensuring that our domestic resource mobilization is at a high, using, of course, TADAT linkages and the correlations that I've just talked about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damakrin, for that. In other words, the linkages are helping us to understand how our actions affect the taxpayers. Transparency is something which is so critical. Accountability is another important element. Taxpayers want to see value out of the taxes that they are paying. In the private sector, you have a choice to buy a product that you want. You spend on something that you want. When it comes to tax administration, you are paying money, and if you don't see value, then you raise many questions. That's why accountability and transparency are very important. And TADAT linkages helps us to understand that relationship. Thank you so much for that. Simon and Damakrin, in your view, should linkages be part of the TADAT methodology? Should it be part of the training? Maybe become the 13th module? What's your view?
That's a nice one. It's indeed a nice one. But indeed, I do believe that including them would really be beneficial for a number of reasons. I must say that part of the way the POAs run, there is already some kind of correlation, no? As you go from 1, 2, 3, there is already a correlation therein. But to the linkages, indeed, they offer a more comprehensive and interconnected view of tax administration. So understanding how different components interact allows for a more in-depth evaluation of the overall effectiveness of the tax system. So for me, I do believe that it should, one, be embedded even as you explain the different POAs, or even operationalize the different performance outcome areas. And identifying linkages can prioritize targeted reform, and that address root causes. We keep treating symptoms, but once this is embedded within the methodology, and this is basically during the assessment, to try and validate POA 1 or 2, you try to ask some of the questions that relate to POA 1. It sort of helps validate and the findings, but also as we are implementing, it really helps to have it engraved therein. Regarding whether linkages should become the 13th module, it depends on the training objectives. You noted that a number of agencies have also adopted a number of smaller bits of TADAT sessions. And so the training objective and the level of expertise of the participants. For more advanced training sessions, incorporating linkages could be very valuable, notwithstanding even the non-advanced. It's very key therein, because then it gives a practical implication of everyone's role in this. As with, of course, any methodology, I do believe that periodic updates are being done. I do believe it would be a nice one to have that linkages as one of the areas, really, especially for a bit of advanced trainings as a 13th module, really, to help you now get this end-to-end picture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Damakrin?
My answer is yes, a definite yes. And this is my reasoning behind it. Mr. Ronald and Simon, you would think that breaking the silos is something easy that could happen overnight. We just need to sit as tax administrators and break the silos. But to date, we are still talking about breaking silos. If I were to talk to some of my seniors who joined tax administrations way back, they will still tell you silos was an issue then. So I think because TADAT is about international good practices in revenue management, maybe it's time to think about moving further and help tax administrators understand the correlations between the performance outcome areas, which really is a correlation in their business processes. Maybe when they look at it, because I know right now for sure, tax administrations have taken TADAT very seriously. So in tax administrations, I can confirm to you from where I am, there is a TADAT unit that monitors initiatives from the TADAT assessment reports. So can you imagine the value that it would add if you were to incorporate TADAT linkages? Because it is being taken seriously, then they would be able to go a step further and think about these correlations. Think about these correlations, and also after the assessment has been done, even during the assessment, maybe what they need to do is have a mapping of who has an impact on your area. If you score a D, and obviously if I have a D in accurate and integrity of the taxpayer register, when you come to POA 4 and POA 5, it is a no-brainer that you are likely to get the same D. You are likely to have a weak performance in those performance outcome areas. So if we have this incorporated in the methodology, it will then challenge the tax administrators to go a notch further. After the assessment, after the training, it will have them take that step that they need to take to ensure that they're more strategic in their planning and looking at their processes and even implementing reforms. So it needs, my take would be, if it is possible, yes, it should be incorporated. It will add a lot of value because it's not, it may seem like an easy area to understand, but it may not be as simple. So having tax administrators taken through it will definitely add value in their processes. Over to you, Ronald.
Thank you so much, Damakrin and Simon. What is coming through from your discussions is that linkages is something that is now strong when it comes to the entire framework of TADAT. We cannot, in other words, ignore linkages. As we talk about the performance outcome areas, we must also consider linkages. We must look at them and understand how these performance outcomes relate to each other. Maybe that takes me also to another question. The performance outcome areas impact each other. That is one. And to get expected outcomes, we must acknowledge that impact. Just give us your views about that statement. We are saying they are impacting each other. We must acknowledge that actually, if you are to get excellent results, yes, there's a relationship between the performance outcome areas. Simon.
Yes, Ronald, thank you so much. Indeed, and to re-emphasize, think of viewing each POA in isolation will lead to a fragmented understanding of the processes within the the tax administration system. So recognizing the interdependencies does, one, provide you a holistic view, and this does allow tax administrations to address root causes. So for me, it is clear that we need to look at it holistically, but also it helps in building synergies and by acknowledging how different POAs impact each other, tax administrations can leverage synergies and amplify positive effects. One of my mentors keeps saying, where are the low-hanging fruits? So look at the low-hanging fruits therein and ground on those, and then amplify those positive effects. So if everyone is looking at this end to end, it really helps. And strengthening one area may have ripple effects, and not a may, because we've validated this from the TADAT linkages, definitely has ripple effects to a number of areas. So indeed, we shouldn't be looking at POAs independently, but the holistic view, which comes even more evident through linkages, is a must-have as we appreciate the TADAT methodology. Thank you.
Thank you. Damakrin?
Maybe what I would just add to what Simon has talked about is that there are those obvious linkages which are direct. When you talked about direct and indirect linkages. So there are those direct linkages which are straightforward, that if, and I know we've talked about accuracy of the taxpayer register quite a bit because it's the core of a tax administration. So that is a direct linkage, but it's also critical for us to understand some of the indirect linkages. So a good example, let me see if I will get this right. A good example of an indirect linkage, for instance, is POA 6 and POA 2. And performance outcome area 6, again, is accurate reporting in tax declarations. So this one has a lot on tax audits. And performance outcome area 2, referring to the compliance risk management, which also ties to performance outcome area 1, accuracy of the taxpayer register. Now, if in POA 2, under compliance risk management, when you flag out a taxpayer during the ranking of the taxpayers, when you rank them to be a high risk, what automatically happens is that this taxpayer may be flagged out for a tax audit. True. If you got it wrong, and remember, there's something Simon said, that when we're looking at the register, we're not just looking at the master data, at the bio data of the taxpayer. We are also looking at the transactional data. So that is what, when you're looking at the transaction, what is in the ledger should also be accurate. So your ledger and the bio data of the taxpayer should be accurate. So if you get it wrong from the accuracy of the taxpayer register, then when the compliance team is drawing up a compliance improvement plan, or when they're doing their compliance checks and rankings, and they happen to rank a taxpayer who should not be in high risk, when they rank the taxpayer under high risk, and this taxpayer goes through a tax audit and he's audited and objects, it also has an impact an indirect impact in dispute resolution. So you see that it's indirect, but it does have an impact. It does have an impact. So we need to also look at the indirect impact of TADAT linkages, these correlations. So moving away from the so obvious correlations to the indirect, those that as a result of inaccurate compliance ranking or compliance risk ranking, or an inaccurate compliance risk management plan, it has an impact in POA 6. So we need to look at when we're looking at correlations, we need to go deeper and look at the indirect impacts, the undesired indirect impacts that may come as a result of direct impacts elsewhere. So it's good for us to, and that is why I say it might not be as straightforward as we think for most tax administrators. So it goes back to maybe there needs to be an awareness on what it really means to talk about these correlations. What are these correlations really when you look at your processes, and how the direct and indirect linkages. I think today I'm going to sing a lot about indirect and indirect linkages through the day, but it is really, really key for us to have the bigger picture of TADAT linkages and correlations. Over to you.
Thank you, Simon and Damakrin. I think you've really brought out it very well. But as we come to the end of this conversation, you are both TADAT sisters. What advice would you give to revenue agencies when they are designing their tax systems or revenue systems? Maybe I can start with you, Damakrin.
Yes, I think we have definitely talked about performance outcome area 1, the register. And I say this because I've been in charge of a data cleansing project that we had to oversee shutting down of an old system as we moved to a new system. The mistake that most tax administrations are doing is we are quick to automating our processes without looking at the critical must-dos before implementing a tax system. So one critical area that we need to focus on, and it is the core, is performance outcome area 1. performance outcome area 1. We need to really, really look at performance outcome area 1 when implementing systems, so that when you are rolling out the taxpayer registration module, it's not enough to ask the taxpayer to provide their mobile details. It's not enough to ask them to provide their email addresses, but you need to go a step further and then do a one-time password to ask them to validate that information that they're giving you. So as we are rolling out tax systems, when we're rolling out the taxpayer registration module, for instance, we need to go further and think about how to validate. How do we validate this information? But the other key one that we need to think about is performance outcome area 6 on cross-matching of data. When we're rolling out systems, are there other systems that we can integrate with through application interfaces to enhance the validation processes of the data that we are getting? I'll give a good example. So for instance, in Kenya, the iTax system is integrated with the business registration service system, which has the data of all companies. So if I am registering for a company PIN, I will only need to put in the PIN number, the business registration number, and the details will be auto-populated. So the system will pull from the BRS, the business registration service system, and the data that we'll be getting, we are sure that this is accurate information because it's coming from the source. The other example that I will give is for individuals. We are also integrated, and I know a number of tax administrations are also integrated with the National Registration Bureau, those who issue the identification number. So when you want a PIN number as an individual, all you need to do is type in the ID number, and then your details will be auto-populated. So we need to go beyond. When you're talking about tax systems, we need to look at POA 1, but we need to look at POA 6. What are other systems? What are these other systems what is the other third-party data that we can use to validate the information that is provided by the taxpayers? So POA 1, POA 6, very critical because third-party, we don't have all the information. We can never really validate all the information that the taxpayer gives us. But when we leverage on third-party data, then we are able to validate a good percentage of the information that we get from the taxpayers. And that will enhance the quality and the accuracy of the data that we are feeding into the systems that we want to implement. Thank you. Thank you, Ronald.
Thank you so much, Demakrin. Simon?
Well, integration is very key, like Demakrin highlighted. But even as we are building M&E system, why reinvent the wheel? You can already, embed the TADAT, linkages therein. It will give you quick mileage. When developing our risk engines, it's a nice one to leverage the areas within effective compliance management. How do you see how do you try and profile the high risk taxpayers and low risk, medium risk? And with the knowledge that with the linkages, I would know that this high risk, this is the way I'll treat them. So as you're building your risk engines, it's rather key that have that sort of profiling of your taxpayers. It will help you in the tax education. So you know if these are high value taxpayers, then you know how to treat them. And but also it helps you along the way to improve compliance, tracking the declaration. So it basically helps all the way. So for me, key takeaways as you're developing your risk engines, embed the TADAT methodology therein, and even a quick one really could be a quick takeaway could be the M&E system, having therein the TADAT methodology, the KPIs therein, timely payments, timely declarations. It's a quick one that agencies can adopt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon and Demakrin, for your time. As we come to the end, I want to say that TADAT proved to be working and very effective when it comes to reforms. So you cannot avoid looking the reforms if you really want to see revenue agencies. Thank you so much for your time, Simon and Peter, and also our audience. I haven't seen any question that is coming through, but let me take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of the head of the TADAT Secretariat, Mr. Modest Mopa, and also use this again time to invite him to say something before we get to the end of this session. Thank you so much. Mr. Mopa Modest, you are most welcome, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronald. Thank you for a great job, great moderation. Thank you, Simon, for a job well done. Thank you, Damakrin. Damakrin, you came in on a very short notice to replace Patience. We're very grateful for that. Very great job. Thank you for the team. You did a great job. Thank you once more.
Sorry, Ronald, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much, our head of the Secretariat, for the remarks. Let me also use this opportunity. I'm seeing Mr. Zake on online. Mr. Zake, can you say just one word or two before we close? Simon, okay. After Mr. Zake, then Simon, you've raised your hand. Mr. Zake, you seem to be muted.
Yeah, I was muted. I was muted. Thank you very much for organizing this. Still more ideas to take on, everybody to toe the line, as it were. It was foreseen that these linkages are there and so on, but the uptake is slow. However, we need to persist and have them done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Simon?
I was just clapping my hand. Thank you so much.
For that. We've come to the end of our session, our discussion on TADAT linkages. Thank you so much, our audience. Thank you so much, our discussants, Simon and Damakrin, for the time and also for discussing very well this very important topic of TADAT linkages. Have a great evening, have a great morning, have a great afternoon, wherever you are.